Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep on a book today called Shadows of Connection.
Yeah, very interesting title, huh?
Definitely grabs your attention. And the content inside, I think, is going to grab our attention even more.
It's really not like those typical friendship books out there.
Yeah, forget those like super cheery, best friends forever kind of vibes. This book goes way deeper.
Exactly. Like it actually challenges that whole ideal friendship thing we all grew up with.
Oh yeah, those like picture perfect expectations. This book's like, nope, not how it works in the real world.
Exactly. It's like holding on to those perfect friendship ideals can actually mess up our real relationships.
Makes you think about all those like falling outs or friendships that just changed over time.
Right. And the book brings in this idea from Carl Jung, the psychologist,
Yeah.
about the shadow self.
Okay, now that's intriguing. I'm kind of familiar with Jung, but for our listeners who aren't, break down the shadow concept.
So basically, we all have this shadow side. It's like those parts of ourselves we hide.
Oh, the stuff we don't want to admit even to ourselves.
Yeah, like those traits that pop up when we're stressed or just not at our best.
Oh, totally. We all have those moments.
And the book's saying that to have really authentic friendships, we got to acknowledge these shadows, not just in ourselves, but in our friends too.
Whoa, so it's not about pretending we're all perfect?
Nope, it's about accepting that everyone has these like hidden depths.
And that those depths aren't always bad.
Exactly. Sometimes those shadow traits are what make us unique and interesting. Yeah,
It's like that saying, our flaws are what make us human.
totally.
Oh, that's
So this whole shadow thing ties into the book's big emphasis on self-acceptance.
like knowing yourself, the good and the bad, before you can really connect with others.
Absolutely. It uses this analogy of building a house. You need a strong foundation to support everything else.
Oh, yeah. Can't build on shaky ground.
Right. So if we don't accept our own strengths and weaknesses, our light and shadow, it's tough to build strong relationships.
Makes you think if we could really see our own shadow selves clearly, would it change our friendships?
That is the question, right? Like, would we understand our friends' quirks more? Be less judgmental.
I mean, we always say nobody's perfect,
Yeah.
but do we actually live by that when it comes to friendships?
And the book's encouraging us to see those shadow sides, not as things to be ashamed of.
But like opportunities for growth.
Exactly. To learn more about ourselves and how we connect with others.
Okay, so we've got this foundation of embracing our shadows, but how does that translate into actually building better friendships?
So that's where it gets really interesting. The book says we need to move past those transactional friendships.
Transactional, like where it's all about favors and stuff.
Yeah, just surface level, no real depth.
Okay, I've definitely had some of those.
The book's pushing for friendships that are all about mutual growth.
Ooh, I like that. Growing together. But doesn't that mean there's going to be some conflict along the way?
Well, yeah, probably.
Hmm.
But the book argues that conflict and even disillusionment can actually be good for us.
Wait, really? Like arguments and feeling let down can be good?
As crazy as it sounds, yeah. Think of it this way. Those tough moments force us to confront things.
Our own weaknesses, maybe? Or like wrong ideas we had about the friendship.
Exactly. It can be painful, but ultimately it leads to a deeper understanding.
Of ourselves and our friends.
Exactly. And it makes the friendship stronger in the long run.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. So it's not about avoiding conflict, but learning from it.
Right. It's like that friends are mirrors saying.
Oh yeah, they reflect back to us things we might not see ourselves.
Totally. And sometimes those reflections aren't pretty, but they're valuable.
And it takes real friend to be honest with us, even when it's tough.
Absolutely. And to be that friend for them in return, right?
Totally. To create that space where you can be vulnerable and honest with each other.
Yeah, it takes a lot of maturity and self-awareness to build that kind of friendship.
Which is something we probably don't learn in school, right? Like how to have those tough conversations, but in a caring way.
That's a good point. And the book sort of challenges us to take responsibility for our friendships.
Not just expecting them to be perfect, but putting in the effort to make them strong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about showing up as our best selves, but also accepting our friends' best and worst.
So we've got self-acceptance, embracing those shadows, and conflict as a growth opportunity. But what about loyalty? Doesn't the book challenge that too?
It does. It suggests that honesty and fluidity are actually more important than blind loyalty in friendships today.
Whoa, that's a big one. Like it's almost saying we need to rethink what it means to be a good friend.
Yeah, it can be a little unsettling. But it makes sense if you think about how much we all change over time.
People change, circumstances change, friendships change. It's got to be okay to adapt, right?
Exactly. And that doesn't mean we abandon our friends when things get tough, but it means being honest with ourselves and each other.
About our needs, our expectations, and how the friendship is evolving.
Exactly. Which brings us to another key point, the balance between empathy and boundaries.
Okay, I can see how that's tricky. We want to be there for our friends, be supportive, but
But we also need to take care of ourselves. It's that whole you can't pour from an empty cup thing.
totally. And that's where boundaries come in, right?
Exactly. The book argues that true friendship needs both deep compassion and healthy boundaries.
It sounds like a paradox. Like, how can you be deeply caring but also have those limits?
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
Hmm.
But the book says it's essential.
So it's not about being totally selfless or always putting our friends' needs before our own.
Right. It's about finding that middle ground where we can support our friends without sacrificing our own well-being.
Like, we can be compassionate listeners, but also say no when we need to.
Exactly. And communicate those boundaries clearly so there's no resentment building up on either side.
This is all making so much sense, but it's definitely challenging some of those deep-seated beliefs I had about friendship.
That's the power of this book, right? It makes you really rethink things.
For sure. And speaking of rethinking things, the book also dives into friendships in the digital age, right? Like how social media impacts all of this.
Definitely. It talks about how online personas and those perfectly curated profiles can mess with real-life connections.
It's so true. We all present this idealized version of ourselves online.
And the book calls it digital shadows, the parts we choose to hide or downplay in our online lives.
So how do we even navigate that? Like, how do we be authentic online A&D, build meaningful connections?
That's a great question and something we'll definitely dive into more in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, can't wait. This is already blowing my mind wide open when
Yeah.
it comes to friendship.
It's definitely a thought-provoking book.
Sorry, so much to unpack here. We've laid out these ideas about friendship, but like, how do we actually putty them into practice?
Right. How do we go from theory to real life?
Exactly. How do we actually cultivate realist empathy and build better connections?
Well, the book has a ton of advice,
Yeah.
but honestly, I think the first step is just paying attention
Okay, paying attention to what exactly?
to everything, like our own thoughts, our feelings, what's happening in our friendships.
So basically becoming more aware, like noticing those patterns that might be holding us back.
Yeah. Bringing mindfulness to our relationships, both with ourselves and with others.
I mean, it makes sense if you're not even aware of what you're doing in a friendship, how can you improve it?
Exactly. And part of that awareness is recognizing those shadow sides we talked about, those parts we might not love.
So being honest with ourselves about our own flaws, not trying to be perfect all the time.
Right. Because guess what? Our friends have shadow sides too.
Oh, for sure. It's easy to judge others when they mess up or do something that hurts us.
But the book's saying, hey, take a step back. Try to see the bigger picture.
See them as a whole person with good and bad qualities.
Exactly. People are complex. They can be supportive and annoying, loving and flawed.
It's about accepting those contradictions, right? Not trying to force our friends into some perfect mold.
And that doesn't mean we just put up with bad behavior.
No, but it means approaching those situations with more curiosity, less judgment.
Like, hey, why did you do that? What's going on? Instead of just getting mad or shutting down.
So it's about communication, trying to understand where they're coming from.
Totally. And that's how we start building stronger, more resilient friendships.
Okay, I'm with you so far. So we're self-aware, we're compassionate. How do we actually start building those better connections?
Remember that self-curation idea? That's huge EE.
Right, being intentional about the relationships we choose to invest in.
The book says you have a choice in who you surround yourself with, which is kind of empowering.
Right. It is. Like, we don't have to stay in friendships that aren't serving us anymore.
Exactly. It encourages us to ask, who inspires me? Who challenges me to grow? Who makes me feel safe to be myself?
And then focus on those relationships. But that might mean letting go of some others.
It can be tough letting go, but sometimes it's necessary for both people to move on and grow.
It's like pruning a garden. Got to make space for new things to bloom.
Love that analogy. And letting go doesn't have to be negative. It can be about recognizing that you've both changed.
That maybe you're on different paths now, but you can still appreciate the time you had together.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked self-awareness, compassion, self-curation, but what about boundaries?
Oh, boundaries. That's a tough one for a lot of people, especially in friendships.
It can feel selfish, like you're not being a good friend.
Like, shouldn't you always be there for them no matter what?
The book says NO. Boundaries are essential for any healthy relationship.
It's about recognizing our own limits,
Hmm.
right? And communicating those limits clearly.
Exactly. It's not selfish to say, hey, I need some space or I can't do that right now.
It's about respecting ourselves and our friends.
And those boundaries can change over time, too. What worked in a friendship years ago might not work now.
That makes sense. So communication is key, being open about what you need and expect from the friendship.
It might feel awkward at first, but those honest conversations build trust in the long run.
So much of this comes down to skills we have to learn, right? It's not like we're born knowing how to set boundaries or communicate effectively.
Definitely. These are things we have to practice, and luckily, the book gives some great tips.
Like what? Give us some practical advice.
Well, one simple but powerful thing is journaling, like writing down your thoughts and feelings after interactions with friends.
Just noticing those patterns can be super insightful.
Totally. And it also emphasizes active listening.
Oh, yeah. Really paying attention to what your friend is saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
And responding with empathy, even when you disagree, trying to see their point of view.
This is definitely a different way of thinking about friendship than what we're usually taught. It takes effort.
It does, but the rewards are so worth it.
Building those deep, fulfilling connections that really enrich our lives.
Exactly. Creating a support system where we can be ourselves, flaws and all.
Okay, so we've talked about the personal level, but the book also goes big picture, right? Talking about how this impacts society as a whole.
It does. It's saying that how we approach our individual friendships can actually ripple outward and create a more compassionate world.
I love that. It's like, be the change you want to see.
Right. And it starts with those small changes within ourselves and our own relationships.
But how do we translate those small changes into something big? Like, how do we impact society as a whole?
The book talks a lot about education, like teaching kids from a young age about emotional intelligence, self-awareness, all those skills that are essential for healthy relationships.
So not just focusing on academics, but also on how to be a good human, a good friend.
Exactly. And that includes learning about empathy, boundaries, communication, conflict resolution, all those things that can make the world a better place.
It's a huge task, but it starts with each of us, right? In our own little corner of the world.
Totally. And the book reminds us that even those small acts of kindness and understanding can make a difference.
Every time we have a difficult conversation with compassion, every time we reach out to someone who's struggling, we're contributing to that bigger vision.
It's about creating a culture where vulnerability is valued, where people feel safe to be themselves.
And where we support each other's growth, even when it gets messy.
Exactly, because that's what real connection is all about.
Okay, as we head into the final part of our deep dive, I'm curious, what's the big question this book leaves us with? Something for our listeners to ponder.
Well, it asks, if we could see our own shadow selves more clearly, if we could accept those hidden parts with compassion, how would that change our friendships? How would it change how we relate to the world?
Whoa, that's deep. And it ties into everything we've talked about today, right?
It's a reminder that self-discovery is a journey, and our shadows are part of that journey.
And that embracing those shadows, both in ourselves and in others, is the key to building more authentic and fulfilling connections.
Exactly. And maybe even changing the world, one friendship at a time.
We'll be right back after a short break to wrap up our exploration of shadows of connection and that thought-provoking question about our shadow selves. Okay, back to those shadow selves. That question's really stuck with me.
Yeah, it's powerful, right? Like, what if we really knew those hidden parts of ourselves?
How would it change things? Not just our friendships, but like everything.
And the book doesn't just leave us hanging with the question. It gives us tools to actually explore those shadows.
Oh, that's good. I was going to say, where do we even begin with that kind of self-discovery?
Well, at the end of each chapter, there are these thought-provoking questions.
Oh, like journaling prompts almost.
Yeah, kinda. To get you thinking deeper about the concepts and how they apply to your own life.
So it's not just reading the book, it's like doing the work, the inner work.
Exactly. Taking those insights and turning them into action. Making changes.
That's how we actually grow, right? Not just by reading, but by doing.
Totally. And it goes beyond individual reflection, too.
What do you mean, like involving other people?
Yeah. It suggests ways to bring these ideas into your community, your social circles.
Interesting. So, like, having conversations about friendship with more than just your close friends.
Exactly. Creating spaces for honest dialogue about connection, vulnerability, all the messy stuff.
Because let's be real, we don't talk about this stuff enough. It's like we're all struggling with these things, but we keep it bottled up.
And the book's saying, hey, let's talk about it. Let's normalize these conversations.
Whether it's in a book club, a workshop, or just with your family over dinner.
It's about being more intentional, creating those opportunities for authentic connection.
I love how this book takes us on this journey, starting with our own personal shadows and then zooming out to like how this can impact the whole world.
It's so well done.
Mm.
Connecting those individual struggles to this bigger picture of human connection.
It's like saying, hey, your personal growth, how you treat your friends, it actually matters.
It ripples outward. It can create a more compassionate society, a more understanding world.
It's giving me chills just thinking about that potential.
It is inspiring, right? And it all starts with that willingness to look inside ourselves, embrace the good and the bad.
And to approach our relationships with curiosity, compassion, that willingness to learn and grow.
Oh, and speaking of learning and growing, we got to talk about the digital shadows thing more. It's just so relevant today.
It is. Like, we can't ignore the impact social media has on our friendships.
It's this whole other layer of complexity. The book challenges us to really think about how we're presenting ourselves online.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in that curated image, the highlight reel.
But real connection, it doesn't come from perfection. It comes from authenticity, from being vulnerable.
Showing our flaws, our struggles, the real stuff, not just the filtered version.
And it's scary, putting yourself out there like that.
But it's also so powerful. When we're brave enough to be real, it gives others permission to do the same.
And suddenly, those online spaces become less about comparison and more about genuine connection.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from Shadows of Connection?
That friendship, it's a journey. It's a constant evolution,
Yeah.
a process of self-discovery.
It's about uncovering those hidden depths in ourselves and in others, and embracing the whole messy, beautiful package.
The joys, the sorrows, the triumphs, the challenges, it's all part of it.
And that's what makes it so rich and rewarding, right? Those deep, authentic connections that help us grow into the best versions of ourselves.
Exactly. And the book gives us the tools, the mindset to build those kinds of friendships.
So to our listeners, go check out Shadows of Connection, explore these ideas, reflect on your own experiences.
And remember, every act of kindness, every honest conversation, it matters.
It contributes to a more compassionate world, a world where everyone feels seen and understood.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Shadows of Connection. Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep embracing the shadows.